Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have been told that Venezuela is looking beautiful this time of year. In fact, those gorgeous Venezuelan beaches are positively breathtaking from the view of the Iwo Jima. I hope people are in the mood for a regime change because, folks, I think it's coming. Now, I can't say for sure, but if my bookie were taking bets on it right now, I think I'm ready to put a sizable amount of cheddar down on very likely. But I want you folks to remember this little spot right here, Marseille. Hopefully one of those is right. But either way, that little destination right on that Caribbean border, that's going to become very important. Now, to sum up the week's events as it pertains to the U.S. and Venezuelan relations, it can basically summed up like this. Geopolitical Monitor does a good job of it. So what happened? The Trump administration deploys some 4,000 soldiers, 7 warships, and a nuclear submarine to the southern Caribbean over the summer. The U.S. military fires on a vessel leaving Venezuela on September 2nd, killing all 11 people on board. The vessel is alleged to have been trafficking narcotics to the United States via Tren de Aragua. That is the group that we are after, and I might be confusing them with another South American gang, Trinidad or something, but I thought they'd been around for about 20 years. And I think they were even involved in an FBI-related bomb plot in or around New York. But again, I might be mixing those up. An additional 10 F-35s, it was initially 5, but now it's 10, are deployed to the region on September 6th. 5 F-35s were seen landing in Puerto Rico over the weekend. President Nicolas Maduro announces that militia and military units will be deployed to battlefront locations across Venezuela on September 11th, and details of the U.S. narrative are challenged, first by media reports claiming the boat had already turned back when it was attacked, and later by assertions from the Venezuelan government that there were no gang members on board. Here's the thing. I'm not saying our media doesn't lie, but I am saying that the Venezuelan media definitely lies a lot more. Nicolas Maduro is effectively a despot, and in fact, I think it was the early Civilization games. If you've ever played those, despotism was like the first form of government, and it was extremely primitive. And it's because a despot is essentially just a guy who has control of the military that really isn't doing any governing, but he has all the power, and he just uses his country that he usually steals in a coup as his own personal piggy bank for leeching the wealth and resources at the expense and off the backs of the people. So either way, Maduro's not a good guy, but why it matters. So there's 2 ways to interpret it, according to these folks here. Drug war reality TV, the optics of cracking down on cross-border drug flows figure prominently in President Trump's foreign policy in the Americas. There was fentanyl trafficking being used as a justification for trade restrictions on Canadian goods, and later the terrorist designation of Mexican drug cartels, followed by hints of U.S. military strikes within Mexico. To actually follow through on strikes in Mexico would be a plan fraught with economic and diplomatic risk. This is perhaps why the onus has now shifted to Venezuela. Regardless of the rationale, the announcement of the operation on True Social came complete with declassified footage of the actual drone strike, visual evidence of the Trump administration's hard stance on drugs. Under this interpretation, future strikes are likely to be piecemeal, and regime change is not the objective. Trump himself has downplayed the possibility. It's all just a matter of posturing for U.S. domestic audiences. That's one way. Here's the other. Regime change redux. There are, however, indications that regime change could still be on the menu. For one, regime change has been a long-standing ambition of U.S. policy toward Venezuela. Yes, it has. Championed by figures who now hold key positions in the Trump administration, notably Marco Rubio. I'm going to pause the reading here. Marco, I don't know if him and Maduro were like old high school nemesis, like they competed on, the football team for scholarships, and I don't know, but I remember Marco even as far as 10 plus years ago, just absolutely gung-ho, let's invade Venezuela. So now that he is as high up in D.C. as he is now, it's definitely an idea getting floated around at a minimum. So back to the article. 2, there's no love lost between Maduro and Trump, as the president recently upped the reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest to $50 million leading up to the boat strikes. Moreover, in his first term, President Trump displayed a conspicuous willingness to get involved in Venezuelan politics, notably recognizing Juan Guaido as the legitimate leader of the country in 2019. The two interpretations are not mutually exclusive. Trump's tough approach on crime remains a bright spot in his domestic polling, and while the prospect of new foreign interventions is extremely unpopular, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that a limited intervention attempting to tilt the scales of Venezuelan domestic politics could be framed in terms of counter-narcotics. This path would entail significant geopolitical risk in the form of military escalation and or state collapse in Venezuela, as the recent history of regime change illustrates. Folks, from what I understand, the state in Venezuela has already collapsed. Okay? We're going to be talking about oil because, of course, where there's America and potential intervention, there's always oil, like all the time. But a lot of people don't even know this. When people think of the oil magnates of the world, they think of the Middle East, right? They think of Saudi Arabia specifically, but a lot of places in the Middle East, and they think of Russia. But actually, it's Venezuela. Venezuela has the single largest oil reserves on the planet. And they used to be the most significant oil producer on the planet as well, until Maduro got in and essentially ran the entire oil industry into the ground. And now they're down to about a third or less of what they could possibly extract and refine and distribute. Part of the problem for Venezuela specifically is they have, I believe, what's called sour crude that is harder to refine. It requires more technology than, say, sweet crude. Like, I think the kind that Saudi Arabia has, they're the dream case scenario, because their oil is basically just like bursting out of the ground, and it takes very little effort on their part to extract and refine if need be and distribute. With Venezuela, they're sitting on a large oil deposit, the largest, but much of it is sour crude, and they used to be able to handle that. They had the tech for that. They had the industry for that until Maduro. He essentially gutted it. And so that will become more relevant later. You'll there's a reason I'm bringing that up. You'll see why. So to bring it back to the last few weeks' events, this is from today. It says 2 hours ago. I think by now it's been closer to 5. So about 5 hours ago, as all of this was playing out, a second Venezuelan vessel, drug vessel, I don't know. We have very limited information on this so far. But Trump announced that the U.S. military targeted a boat from Venezuela, killing 3 more people aboard in international waters today. The first strike occurred 2 weeks ago and killed 11 alleged members of the Tren de Aragua gang. Many senators, both Democrats and Republicans, have expressed concern regarding the legality of using military force in this context. Trump justified the strikes by stating that these cartels are a threat to U.S. national security, claiming they transport drugs, harming Americans. Now, folks, the drug landscape has changed. That's a whole different conversation, and Peter Zeihan, if you're familiar with him, does a way better job than I could explaining the drug market. But while cartels are extremely powerful, extremely influential, and do traffic a shitload of drugs into the United States, the game has changed. You can have a lab about half the size of your garage. In fact, if you are a real pro, you could have one half of your garage dedicated to parking your car, and then in the second half, you could set up a fentanyl lab that could manufacture enough fentanyl to be worth probably tens of millions of dollars. So the drug thing is not why we're in Venezuela, folks. That's what I'm here to talk about. This is going to be one of the dominoes that probably leads us to World War III. It's not going to be the reason that we get into World War III. That's going to involve things like Russia and China in a much more direct way, which a lot of bad news on the Ukrainian front as well. I'll cover that in another video, but that war is not going to end soon, and likely whether Russia is able to win it on their own, they are probably going to end up being the victor eventually, because they'll have to be. I hate it on a moral level on every single way, but I'll get into that in another video. So the next like that, so this is off the back of yesterday. Venezuela had a fishing boat raided by the U.S. Marines. They held, I believe, about 9 fishermen hostage. They did so for about 8 or 9 hours, and then they released them to the Venezuelan Navy. And that is coming off of the back of those F-35s that we're seeing landing in Puerto Rico. Here, though, is something else, is that a few days even prior to that, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, visited Puerto Rico and probably arranged for some brand spanking new F-35s to go ahead and park over there, which we're going to look at a map here in more detail because there's a lot to unpack. But that is coming off of the back of this original boat attack. And actually there were 2 boats. There was a fishing boat and I believe one more that resulted in some more deaths. So we've hit a total of, by my count, I believe 3 ships, not 2. So as all of that is going on, now this, we go back to August, all the way back to August. Venezuela knew this attack obviously was coming because we didn't exactly do anything to hide it. We literally had like 11 cruisers around Florida, and then about 5 or so, like we have 5 ships around Venezuela and 11 total in the area, but especially around Florida. I'll show you a map of that too. And there's a very good reason for that. Venezuela making Iranian drones to use against US. That is something that has not been discussed much. And it really should, because this is a result of multiple administrations failing miserably, that due to this tunnel vision they got, first with the Middle East, and then as we focused on winding down our presence in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're still hyperfixated now on the Pacific Asia region and also in Europe, we became so tunnel vision focused on those specific areas that we neglected the South American theater and allowed China and Russia and now Iran to essentially wiggle their way into our backyard and set up shop in places that we haven't had any hostile presence in since about the 1970s. Part of our security apparatus is not just our geography, it's the fact that we don't have any hostile physical assets even on the same continent as us or the adjacent continents. Now, yes, there are missiles obviously that have the ability to hit us, but I mean, that's if that happens, we're not just starting World War III. World War III has likely already happened, and we are in the process of. But the thing that people have not brought up much, that I don't really understand why, is Conviasa, Venezuelan state-owned flag carrier. Conviasa Airlines, heavily involved in the global illicit arms network for Iran. So they smuggle weapons for Iran, and then Iran, in turn, smuggles weapons to Venezuela. And among those cargoes are drone parts. At one point in Buenos Aires, an airline jet that was, what was it called? Oh, no, okay, yep, that, M-Trosser. So there was one single Boeing, one single plane, right? And it was just going back and forth between Venezuela and Iran. Very suspicious, very open about it. So eventually it gets stopped in Buenos Aires, and they find Venezuelan and high-ranking retired generals and pilots of the IRGC, the Iranian Republic Guard. They were all loading up what they claim are car parts, but they're not. They're drone parts. And this is a rather significant issue because, and this is one of the primary reasons, there are two. Spoiler alert, neither one of them have anything to do with Tren de Aragua. But here is one pretty significant reason. And it goes all the way back to about 2003 or 2006. But Hugo Chavez was still in. He unveiled that Venezuela had been working on drones. Essentially, he was very proud of the fact that he was working on a type of weapon with the ability to challenge the West. And he was so proud of it that he turned it into a national television affair as he unveiled the initial drones. Now, these initial drones were based off of Iranian schematics, and they were pretty crude at the time. In fact, I believe they were really only capable of approximately 12 miles, 12 to 24. But as you can see here, these names basically don't matter because really all they are Iranian drones. They're Iranian drones made in Venezuela. And you have three types of drones. You have surveillance drones, you have kamikaze drones, and you have air-to-ground bombing drones. So drones that are equipped specifically to handle certain kinds of missiles that are going to do what missiles do, which is really fuck shit up. So the problem with that is, you see over here, remember that city I told you to pay attention to? Marquez? There's a base right outside of Palo Negro, And it is Base Area El Libertador. And this base right here is not just an Air Force base as it says, but it is the same base where they started and are currently building all of those drones that you saw. Okay? And it's right on the edge of that border where you have surveillance, kamikaze, and drones capable of missile strikes. And those drones now have the capacity to go more than 200 miles, which means that from Miami up to Tallahassee and beyond are now applicable targets. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the result of decades of negligence, decades of multiple administrations on the left, on the right, in the center, whomever. Everybody fucked up here. We had no reason to allow any of our adversaries to get anywhere near the Western Hemisphere at all. So that was a massive fuck up, which is why Trump has assets deployed from Florida all the way up almost to the north, as well as ships and a submarine that's basically going to watch for anything like this. There's probably more than just this one submarine, but even just this one submarine, if you look up some of the specifications for what everything from Virginia class to LA class to the Seawolves to all of our submarines are just savage. They're savage, they're silent assassins, and they have great radar systems. So they'll pick up anything that even tries to get past the Atlantic or anywhere near it. So they're doing this because Maduro's not going anywhere, is basically the idea here. And this is an older photo, in August. We have more assets here since that time. So that's one reason, but there is another reason. And this is the reason that I told you it just would not be good old-fashioned United States intervention if it did not involve good old liquid gold. So in 2023 through 2024, there was a bit of a flashpoint, a bit of a crisis. In fact, it was so well publicized because at the time, things had escalated so badly that we thought that there was going to be a war between Venezuela and Guyana. Now, I laughed when I talked about Maduro deploying military forces to their battlefronts because it was hilarious. I'll show you in a second. There's a reason they didn't invade, aside from the fact that they knew that the U.S. would respond. If they thought that they could get away with it and pull it off, they absolutely would have. But logistically, this is a nightmare trying to cross through anywhere here. Nobody wants to do it. Like, this would be, it's jungle, it's dense, it's trying to roll tanks through it. Good luck. It's a nightmare. But they really, really wanted to. Because, one, when a dictator is losing their grip on power, they tend to do things like what Maduro did at this exact time, which is Guyana in 2015 discovered that actually they had a ton of oil. They were previously a very poor country, and then they found this oil, and since then their GDP has literally been doubling year over year to the point where they are actually becoming a world player. So their GDP has skyrocketed, their wealth has skyrocketed. A lot of pundits and news people have effectively referred to it as Guyana hitting the jackpot. The problem with hitting that jackpot is that Maduro used this as an excuse to hold a bullshit referendum. And the referendum was, do you believe that Essequibo is Venezuelan territory? And do you believe that we should invade Guyana to take back our territory, which this green right here, all this light green, that's the territory that was being disputed by Venezuela. The dark green here, that's the part of Guyana that would be left. So Guyana was understandably extremely concerned because Venezuela dwarfs them in size and also military capabilities, although there's not that much of a reason to be concerned because according to the corruption index, there's an entire ranking of corruption among countries, and we all know that Russia is pretty high on that list. And if you follow the Russia-Ukraine war, you know that Russia's military has become the stuff of memes because what they were supposed to be capable of on paper turned out to be absolutely nothing close to what they were actually capable of. And one of the largest factors, aside from the fact that they've essentially been doing a fantastic job bluffing since the Cold War. We fell for it. We believed in the myth of the Russian bear. And look, they do have legitimate capabilities, and they do know how to build some legitimately terrifying weapons. But they over-exaggerated a lot, and whatever capabilities they did have were severely reduced, on part due to corruption, to the point where, if you aren't familiar, the Ukrainian defense minister actually sent a thank you card to the Minister of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, specifically for allowing the Russian military to become so rotten by corruption that they actually lost their ability to effectively run an army and gave Ukraine a fighting chance. So you'll notice here, that Russia, that super corrupt Russia, the stuff of legends, ranks 154. Venezuela, out of 180, is 178, folks. So I want you to think of all of your worst exaggerations of Russia. Now, magnify that by several times over, and that's what you're looking at with Venezuela. So their military is doing somewhere between fuck and all. They're not doing anything. But we get a couple of benefits by getting involved. Number one, we put Guaido back in. He's, according to us, the legitimate leader of Venezuela. He is the actual serving president, and he is the one that we recognize formally as their leader. Maduro is a guy we currently have a $50 million hit on, which, as corrupt as I just showed you their military is, and with the walls closing in around them, I'm just floating a hypothetical around, but say somebody was real close to Maduro, and say somebody was smart enough to see the writing on the wall, and maybe they decided that they wanted a cool 50 mil and either U.S. citizenship or a way out of Venezuela long enough for things to cool off, for Guaido to get in, and then they can come back to Venezuela heralded as a hero and live off of $50 million. It would be very, very possible at this point. So we get a president installed that isn't just our friend. This person owes us their life because we got them back in power and out of the crosshairs of a dictator who stole their spot. again, Venezuela, largest oil producer in the world. Having a very, very friendly leader and business partner would be a massive boon to the United States. Now, there's a double effect here. In addition to Venezuela, Guyana, now the people of that nation that just hit the jackpot, they hit the lottery, they're making lots of money, but they're not sleeping so good, you know? Big, huge nation, it's multiple times the size of them. Their military could easily crush this tiny little nation state. We have states bigger than this. It's hard to sleep when you're worried about the prospect of being invaded. So if we take that away overnight, well, now we already have amicable relations with Guyana, but we can go from that to very, very, very friendly. And we have two prominent nations in South America that are now very pro-West. This does a couple of things. It gives us access to the largest oil reserves in the world. It gives us two prominent business partners with a lot of money to spend. But it does something else that's arguably even more important. Venezuela goes from being a hostile country to leaving this so-called new axis, and we kick Iran, China, and Russia out of our backyard, which they never should have been in the first place. We never should have let them get there. So regardless of what you think about Trump, the fact that he's actually addressing this concern, even if it's for the wrong reasons, even if the guy is not even thinking that far ahead, even if he doesn't realize what he's doing, which is possible. To be fair, it's a strong possibility that Trump is just thinking about money right now. But to me, it doesn't matter. The result is the same. If we get an improved security situation, an improved geostrategic situation in South America because of either an invasion, which is possible, or a coalition of the willing in South America, because trust me, Venezuela is surrounded by a lot of people who don't like them very much, and they would be more than happy to send troops in if they thought that the U.S. was happy to lend air and naval support, which I'm sure we are more than happy to do, because that's why we have assets parked right outside. So this is very likely to happen. But it does a third thing. The oil coming out of Venezuela right now, in part, is going to China. And this ties into the Ukraine war and why there's going to be a very sad ending. So I won't touch too much on this yet. But China is entirely reliant on imports for oil, and they are getting a lot of it from Iran, but also from Venezuela. If we can cut off the spigot, remove the access, we have a massive strategic advantage. So we're accomplishing multiple things that could in fact lead to a domino effect in the South American security prospects and also resource control. So hopefully, and I cannot stress this enough, hopefully this little narco war that Trump is going on, regardless of the real reasons, I hope it goes well. I hope it is fast. I hope it is smooth. And I hope that if we choose to really follow through with this, that we take all of the lessons learned from our more recent Middle East conflict, we apply them to now, and we can turn this into a golden opportunity as opposed to another military disaster. That's what I'm hoping, but time will tell. We still have a lot more information that's going to be coming out of here, and with certain developments, I will cover them because I'm going to be following geopolitics on all sides. I have many, many resources, both free and paywalled access, that I read along with military documents. So I will be keeping up on this to a degree that very few people, and even fewer with YouTube channels, keep up on. So if you are interested in global conflict, in global affairs, news in general, you're going to want to check back in, because aside from other random topics that interest me, this is the kind of stuff I will be covering a lot of. So with that, thanks for watching. I will see you on the next one, which is going to be about Russia, Ukraine, and why Trump is being so amenable to Putin. Because there's a very good reason, but also very unfortunate in terms of the likely outcomes. See you then.